Welcome all of you. I'm so glad to see and hear you. Um, this is the Future Trends Forum. My name is Brian Alexander. I am your host, Chief Catherd, and MC today. I'm very, very glad to see all of you. Greetings, by the way, from Philadelphia, where in between several successive nor'easters and one academic conference, I'm here from the event, having just moderated a panel. And I'm very glad to see and hear all of you. I'm glad you could make it. So let's proceed with the introduction. There, if we head to the next slide, please. So let me explain about the Future Trends Forum, where it comes from, how it works, before we dive into this week's guest and today's subject. So the forum is an outgrowth of the Future Trends in Technology and Education report. That's a monthly trends analysis that takes a look at major trends shaping education and technology. It's been running for coming about 6 years now. We have a battery of about 86 trends that we track, and we look at these so that we can extrapolate them forward to get a better sense of where education and technology are going. If you haven't seen it before, go to ftte.us. You can download a few sample copies. And you can also take a look online at the hashtag FTTE for discussion on Twitter. That's a publication. What we're doing now is a discussion. So over to the next slide, please. Now, that's part of a project we have called the Future of Education Observatory. This is a multimedia, open, social, continuous experiment trying to grab as much information as we can about where education and technology are going. That includes many, many parts, including the FTTE report, including a blog, including a book club, and including this forum. Now, over to the next slide, please. A key thing about this forum, in fact, for all this discussion and work, is that it is deeply international. We're very invested in trying to have as many conversations as possible that involve as many people from around the world. Really, if we're taking a look at current developments and where education could be going, we want to make sure that we're able to get as wide a perspective as possible, because increasingly, education as well as technology are really transnational events where they cover a great range of territory. So you can see this from this map that we've had participants and guests from all over the world, and we hope to see more and more of that. Over the next slide, please. Now, we were able to do this thanks to the support of a few generous people and organizations, and I wanted to thank them before we proceed. So first of all, let me thank NYSERNet from New York State. That's a nonprofit that works with higher education institutions as well as libraries and museums, trying to get them online and to broadband connectivity in New York State. We're very grateful to them for their support. We're also grateful to Shindig, because if Shindig is obviously making available the technology that we're using now. If you take a look around, in fact, let me just give you a quick tour of where things are. The very top of the screen where I am and where this slide is called the stage. Everybody in this video conference can see and hear everybody on the stage. That's the idea. And you can join us on stage. I'll show you how in just a few seconds. Now, below us, you can see a whole bunch of different people represented either by silhouettes, photographs, or video feeds. So right now I can look down and see, for example, Mark Gillette. I can see Mark Berman, Jonathan Poritz, Eileen Frank, Laura Riddle. And each of those silhouettes or video feeds represents one person or one sign-in. And if you want to get to talk to one of those people, simply click or double click on their icon. And if they're available to talk to you, your two icons will click together like Lego bricks, and you'll be able to have your own private audiovisual bubble in your own conversation. Now, conversations, what this is about. So let me show you some of the major tools for talking to everybody else. Look at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a white strip running along it. It has a few different buttons. So on the very left edge is a button that looks like a bunch of heads and has the number 44 right now. That's the number of people who are involved in this video conference. And also, if you click on that, you'll get a kind of film strip showing you all those different people. So I can see Bryan Caplan, Tara, I can see Michael, I can see Fred Bashirs, and so on. So if you want to find out more about people who are in there, you can click on that. Now, next to that button, you'll see what looks like a kind of cartoon dialog box. That's a text chat. And if you click that, up will pop a text chat box for everybody in the room with you. And by the room, that is the 18 or so people who are logged into the Shindig environment with you. So you can see right now in my room, Kathleen Fitzpatrick, Eileen Frank, Mark Gillette, Mark Berman, Laura Riddle, and Schaefer Kelly Walsh, and so on. If you want to change rooms, no problem. Just go to that long scroll list, click on somebody else, and you'll pop over that way. Or look at the right edge of your screen. You'll see a little chevron. Click on that, and you can pop into another room. Now, that's one way to talk. You can share conversation notes and thoughts that way. Now, if you'd like to be a little more direct than that, look in that white strip again. There's a question mark and a circle. If you click on that, you'll have the chance to type in a question or a comment. And we'll take that question or comment, flash it on the screen so everyone can read it, and I'll read out loud so everyone can hear it. And I think people often do that when they have a very specific comment, question, objection, or example they'd like to share. Now, if your microphone and video camera work, and you're in a place where the audio is good enough that you can talk out loud, click the raised hand icon. Now, this is my favorite part. If you click that, that tells us you want to join us on stage. So right away, with just a little bit of effort, you click that and you can join us and you can talk. You can have conversations and be visible, which is a lot of fun. If that sounds tricky, it takes less time to do than it just did for me to describe, and you can have a nice conversation with all of us. In fact, you see here at the top of the stage, we've got two different panels. We can hold 4 different people at one time, so we can have 2 more people join us in just a little while. So click the raise hand button, click the circle over the question mark, click the text chat. These are all different ways that you can communicate with us and share your thoughts, which is what this is all about. And we're very grateful to Shindig for making this technology available. Now, Tara, if you could advance the slide one more time. We want to thank one other source of support, which is the dozens and dozens of people on Patreon who are supporting our work. If you haven't had a chance to look at Patreon, it's a crowdfunding source, kind of like Kickstarter or like GoFundMe, where people can chip in a little bit of money to support a project or a person. In this case, the project in person is me doing the work of the future of education. So as you can see from this slide, we've had people like Michael Huggins, Jenny Kim Han, Paul McConaughey, all contributing a lot of money, not a lot of money, they're contributing different amounts of money and their attention in order to keep us going. We're very, very grateful to our patrons for their support. If you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, go to patreon.com/Bryan Alexander and find out more. Now, speaking of more, let's plunge into this week's conversation. Do that by introducing Bryan Caplan. So first of all, it's obvious that Bryan Caplan has the best first name of any human on Earth. I think that goes without saying. But let me introduce him a little bit more carefully. He's a professor of economics at George Mason University in Northeastern Virginia. He's also a producer of an awful lot of media and writing. He's a blogger for EconLog. He's written a series of books, including The Myth of the Rational Voter and Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, and the book today that just came out called The Case Against Education. If you had a chance to see or read this, I strongly recommend it. It's a fascinating, very, very accessible, very well-argued book. You can find out a lot about it because he's been all over the media. He's been on The Atlantic, he's been on multiple media sources making his argument, and I think it'd be fair to say driving a lot of people absolutely bonkers. His arguments are incisive, well-researched, very intelligent, and very, very provocative. So let's beam him up on stage, and let's have 2 Bryans on stage for the first time. And let's see. Bryan, can we hear and see you?
I can hear and see you. Everything's good.
Fantastic. Well, it's really, really good to see you. I didn't realize that although we have the same first name, we have the exact opposite head of hair. Well, in all seriousness, Bryan, let me welcome you. I'm really delighted that you had time. You must have a very busy schedule between teaching your students and also dealing with all the media attention. So as I guess part of the media attention, we're really grateful for you to come in.
My pleasure. Let's get started.
Well, to begin with, let me just ask you a quick question. And by the way, friends, I have a whole series of questions to ask Bryan, and I'm sure you do as well. I have the advantage of having the mic and the video feed, so I can ask them all the time. But please, as we go, please summon up all of your questions and comments, and please share them using the different means I've mentioned. The first question I have to ask Bryan is, what do you do with your time? You are a professor of economics, so you get to teach and research. What's taking up most of your hours these days?
These days, the main thing taking up my time is publicity for the book. So, what I usually do when I have a new book out is I pretty much clear my whole schedule other than teaching. And again, if you read the first page of my book, I mention how much time teaching takes, which is about 150 hours a year plus a little bit more. So,
13 hours a week.
Yeah, I think it's a lot less than that, right? So it's about 3 hours a week. If you average it over.
In class.
Pardon?
That's in-class experience.
Yeah. But then, like almost all the classes I've taught many times before, so the extra work outside the class is very little. There's a research assistant to grade the homework. So, I grade a few exams. That's about it. So most of the time I'm focused on research. I also do blogging. Like for students, I'm constantly accessible to any student who actually wants to stop by my office and talk and learn. But like the harsh reality is, very few people consider it worth their time to walk 10 minutes across campus to hang out with me. If students really like talking to me, then I get nothing done. But here I am.
But that's also keys into the reality that you describe in your book about student attitudes towards learning in a market sense. So we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. Besides the economics and the value of higher education, what else have you been researching this year and thinking about?
Let's see. So right now, my other big project is I'm working on a nonfiction graphic novel on the science and philosophy of immigration. So if you may, yep. So I'm a big fan of graphic novels. Nonfiction graphic novel just uses the grammar and vocabulary of comic books to communicate nonfiction. And so I can't draw, but I've actually managed to get my number one choice for artist choice in the world to be my collaborator. This is
Zach Wienersmith.
Zach Wienersmith, who does famous webcomic Saturday Morning Breakfast serial. So I just talked him into it, and he's done about 3/4 of the draft pages. So he just sent me page 159 or so today, page 160. So that I did I wrote the full script in visual and pre-visualization, and then he actually goes and draws it, and then we're in very close collaboration where I'll tell him, change my expression from this to this or something. There's that, and then I've got having a few other books, but that's the project that's coming next and should be out next year actually.
Well, that's terrific. I'm biased in part because I'm a graphic novel fan, but also our future of education.
You don't fit the profile at all.
Oh, no, right. I actually taught class multimedia literature where we used several graphic novels, but also our online book club just finished reading Soonish, which he co-authored with his partner, Kelly Wienersmith, which is a terrific book.
Yep, I signed the contract with Zach, and then he had a runaway bestseller. Right. So, I went and told my kids, what this means, kids? And one of my sons says, yes, Dad, it means that you got your co-author for way below his market price. Exactly. Great.
Wise child. Very wise child. If they were doing magical thinking, they could say, well, you got the magic touch. Perhaps. Well, let me ask, to begin with, so we have a sense of who you are and what you work on, and also further work of you that we should anticipate down the road. Let's dive into your book. I'm fascinated by this book for a wide variety of reasons. And I don't want to ask you to summarize the book because you're asked to do that all the time. You summarize it many, many places. And I think it's actually, the main argument is actually pretty clear. In my reading, your key point to make is that the function of education, and that's K through 12 as well as post-secondary education, is signaling, not intelligence, and not learning. So as other people have observed before you, there's what some call the sheepskin effect, that if I go to Princeton University, as you did, and I spend 10 years taking every class I can and acing all those classes and learning a lot, but I don't get a diploma, the market effect of all of that is nil. But if I go to Princeton for 3 years, I fob off my classes, don't learn very much, but I get a degree, that paper is worth a lot more than that 10 years of experience. So you're saying the sheepskin effect, the signaling is the most important thing about education, and that on the one hand, that's an important discovery, and on the other hand, this tells us that education is really wasting a lot of time and money. How am I doing so far as a summary?
Yeah. So good. So, the sheepskin effect, I'd say, is one piece of evidence for signaling. The general idea is that there's two totally different ways that education could pay off in the real world. One is you go there and they pour skills into you, which happens to some extent. You get literacy and numeracy, or maybe you learn how to program in Java or something like that. But I say that's far from the whole story. You also spend a ton of time studying subjects that realistically you're never going to use after the final exam, and yet employers care. That's the key fact. Employers still care. You say, well, what do you care whether I failed Latin or not? Well, I'm not going to. This is not a Latin-based job, and yet it's unlikely you'll even get to say those words to their face because they won't even give you the interview, so you can go and make your feeble protest. So, the explanation for this is that all this education that you aren't going to use still is a way for you to convince employers you're worthy. It's a way to get certification, to get stamps on your forehead, and when you get enough of those stamps, then employers are interested in you. And again, what difference does it make? Selfishly speaking, it doesn't really matter very much why education pays, but from the point of view of taxpayers, it matters tremendously, because if school is pouring skill into you, then taxpayers are getting something for the money. But if the main thing that's going on is jumping through hoops, then
when you yeah, when you say selfishly, do you mean as an economics professor or as any person inhabiting the universe of education?
Yeah, for any individual. So like any individual,
okay,
what is good for me, right? And I say, yeah, it's good for you to go and get a bunch of impressive credentials, because they do open up doors, they do get you more money, right? And especially without them, it's really like there are a lot of jobs that are just completely closed off to you, or almost closed off to you. But anyway, so from the point of view of taxpayers, this is very wasteful, because simple point: if everyone had one fewer degree, if everyone had one fewer sticker on their forehead, then you would know it wouldn't take as much to impress employers, and people could just start their lives at an earlier age. So to me, one of the most impressive bodies of research on this question is that there's a lot of research on what's called credential inflation, where they just go and measure how much education do waiters have today versus in the past. And then, is there any plausible story where it's really more intellectually demanding to be a waiter today than the past? If anything, seems to be less so, because you don't even have to do arithmetic anymore. 1950, your waiter might have added up your bill at the table, and yet the amount of education that people have for one and the same job has risen a lot over time. Roughly by about a degree since 1950 or so.
Yeah.
And then just realizing what would be a better world? A better world would be one where you can get a good job right out of high school, which used to be true.
Right. Go to manufacturing, say.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, you could be a secretary or a concierge at a fancy hotel. Like these are jobs where today you very plausibly will need a college degree to get them. But why? You don't need them to do the job, but you need them to get the job. Two different things.
See, I'm in this weird position now. I'm in a few weird positions. One of them is I don't know how many people in today's forum have completed your book. I have, and I have to ask you a question. I know your answer in the book, but I'm asking in part for everybody else, and because I'd like to see where you go with it. The question I would ask is, and this is an obvious, evident question, but education is about producing a well-rounded person. I mean, if I'm going to become a Java programmer, I go to school and I learn Java as long as systems architecture and all that. That's very good. But I get to read 17th century poetry. I get to learn about French history. I get to learn about biology. And I'm a better person with a richer mental life. Isn't that great? And your response is?
Well, twofold. First of all, even if it were great, there'd still be the puzzle about why employers care. So why is it so hard to just only do the computer classes and skip the other stuff? And at least that would be intellectually puzzling. You might say, that's kind of odd, right? And especially if you go and actually ask students, why are you in college? The overwhelming answers are to get a better job and make more money. The stuff you're talking about is way down the list of priorities. So I think it's fair to say that if you didn't have the big financial payoffs for college, I think a vastly smaller number of share would go. But the deeper answer to all of this is, it's one thing to say that education aspires to create well-rounded people. That doesn't mean it really does. So yeah, it's built into the ideology of school that we're doing this. But if you want to find out, does it actually work? You've got to go and look at graduates and see, well, how well-rounded are they? How much do they really know about these other subjects? And the answer is very little. And you see very little knowledge produced. And again, possibly they knew it on the day of the final exam and then forgot, but it still means that once they're done, they don't actually know very much. And then secondly, so not only is it that they've forgotten it, but also doesn't seem to have much effect on their attitudes. So you're going to see how little leisure time college graduates devote to ideas or culture. The people here on Shindig are totally out of the norm. Most people, you'd have to pay them to do this thing. They say, "Oh my God, I just sit there and talk about some stupid book, boring." I want to go and watch the latest story about Meghan Markle. That's fascinating. What? So she charmed the crowd. Now you got my attention. Right? And this is what normal human beings are like, including normal college graduates. It's sad, but it's the truth.
Well, you had a piece in Tom's Higher Ed about Shakespeare versus the Kardashians, right?
Yes. Yeah. So the Kardashians out-Google Shakespeare. Shakespeare actually does way better than almost any other high culture figure. So if you start going down to Wycliffe Faulkner or David Hume, then it's, oh my God. Some of the greatest artists and thinkers in the world are less well known than like one of the like the people on Chopped, or like you can go real low down in the pop culture hierarchy and still say, wow, David Hume is losing to like a show where people try to out eat an animal or something. This is the harsh reality of the world.
But wouldn't the case then be that at least students are exposed to a non-Kardashian item of content, where they have a chance to get away from that perpetual space? That once they leave, then they can make web pages about the Kardashians and so on. But in the meantime, we get a chance to give them a shot at Abyssinian history or Einstein's theory of relativity.
Yeah, I mean, this is
But
where
your
I'm
point
enough
would
an
be
economist to
that
say,
happens, but it doesn't really work.
Yeah, I mean, to say, well, how much are we supposed to pay to go and expose one more person, or to get one more person interested in opera? There is a point. Like I'm a big opera fan, and like I'm delighted to go and give someone a chance to hear it. But if you have to go and spend $1 million to expose 1,000 people, and then 1 out of the 1,000 becomes a fan, it seems like a very high cost to go and expose people to stuff, especially in the world of the internet when there's unlimited free enlightenment opportunities available to everyone.
So that's now we shift away from the signaling assessment of education to the question of cost and waste. And that's an important, maybe, in fact, I think in some ways the most important part of your book. But before I dive in, and I could interrogate you for weeks, we have a couple of questions that have come up. We have one from Elliot Williams. Tara, let's see if we can bring him up on stage. Brian, are you new to this Shindig technology?
I was exposed yesterday, so I'm an old pro.
Okay. Good. You're a veteran. So, Elliot, can you see and hear us? Okay.
I can.
Okay. We really need a dramatic sound effect, maybe the Star Trek teleportation noise, or maybe a drum roll. Let's see if we can come up. That's pretty good.
So what's your question?
Okay. So, hey, thanks for the question.
I don't think we've got him. I think he's timing out right now. This is always an infrastructure issue.
Can you tell me whether this argument
that you're making... Just speak up a little, please.
I'm sorry?
Speak louder, please.
Oh, okay. Can you tell me this argument you're making, does it apply equally to vocational training and STEM degrees, or is it really focused on a humanities degree?
Right. So, certainly doesn't apply equally to vocational training or STEM degrees. I think it still applies to a substantial degree for most of the STEM degree programs that I know about, because it's very common, even in STEM, that you'll spend a lot of time disproving theorems, things that are of interest to, say, engineering professors, but no practicing engineer would ever do. For vocational education specifically, I'd say that it applies the least. There's almost always going to be some signaling part where you're just doing something that they're putting some time into a part of it that you're not going to use again, but it's still impressive. But yeah, I mean, it varies a lot from topic to topic. Like in the book, I try comparing both different parts of the K through 12 curriculum as well as different majors. Now, I mean, I will say that this is an area where the research is sufficiently thin that there's just not much on it. So, I mean, I think basically these are answers where I think that it's very likely to be that answer, but. In the book, I just tried to pull together everything that was out there, but the level of detail that people have paid to this topic, is so disappointing in a way. I mean, I've tried to collect everything that's out there, and yet there's still some big questions that haven't really been properly studied. So, are we still back?
It's a question. Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, there's a glitch on my phone, and I couldn't actually hear Elliot's question, but I did hear your response. So let me just kind of secondhand remove. Say thank you very much, Elliot, for the question. Brian,
thanks.
thank you for the answer. Friends, if you haven't had a chance to read the book, one of the great things about it is that it's stuffed full of research, both many citations, and also Brian goes into detail talking about the different fields that he dives into. Especially, I think you said it was industrial psychology was the one that really impressed you the most.
Yeah. Well, industrial psychology, educational psychology more directly, but yeah, industrial psychology. I also learned a lot there. So, yeah, I mean, it's striking because you have a lot of labor economists, but they generally just want to judge productivity purely by your pay. Whereas over in industrial psychology, they will consider that, but they'll consider a lot of other measures too. So, like you've got employer ratings of job performance. You've got actual objective counts of like how many widgets does a person produce per hour. You've got all kinds of different measures, and industrial psychologists, they're more open-minded than economists. They try to look at a bunch of different kinds of evidence. So kudos for them. Yeah. By the way, on the Shindig software, note that there is the icon to buy the book over on the left. So it's only $20, and it's even easier than normal. You just press that, and you will have it flying to you almost instantly. So,
which is pretty good. Which is pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, this is, and if you, and at the very end of today's talk, I'll point out the bookstore for the Future Trends Forum, so you can see ways of obtaining this book. I just want to relay a comment that comes in, and then we'll go to another text question. Jennifer Adams has this interesting observation. She says, I think people grow in college, and employers know this. They learn how to deal with people from outside their family and hometown. They may learn group skills, social skills, learn about failure, and ultimately getting their degree. They prove success with getting through those experiences. How do you respond?
You know where else people get valuable life experience? On the job. That's another useful place to get life experience. So yeah, I mean, this is what I put in the category of arguments that compare education to being locked in a closet for 4 years. It's like, wow, education's great compared to being locked in a closet for 4 years. You go and meet people and have experiences and fail and try and fail. All right, but that's not a very relevant comparison. The relevant comparison is, well, what do people normally do? What do people around the world and throughout history do instead of be in school between the ages of 18 and 22 or 14 and 22? Is they have jobs and they work and they learn things that way. So, meanwhile, I'm happy to admit that school is teaching some kind of discipline and socialization, but you can get, not only can you get in other places, you would normally get it in other places if you weren't doing it. The thing of it's sort of getting kids from small towns and exposing them to a bigger world, that's one where I think it's a better argument. Although, again, it's important to consider the difference between, what if one person doesn't go to school or they may just stay on the farm versus what if a whole generation of people are not going to college? In that case, I think they're likely to do what people have done in earlier times when college wasn't such a big deal, which is that you move to a city and then you get a job there and start working your way up. So again, there's a long tradition of people who grow up in a backwater going to a central area where they can plug into the whole world economy and just find out what's going on in the broader world, and that stuff is great. Today, this has become one of the main things that colleges do. But again, there's nothing intrinsic about it that has to be this way. It's just that right now, almost all the talented young people go to college, so that's where you go to meet talented young people. But in a world where the normal thing was to go and become an apprentice in a major city, then that would be where you meet the other talented young people. So again, it's not really much of a defense of the system that we have.
So have you seen the Mission U school that just launched?
I think I've heard about it, but I don't know anything about it.
I'm wondering, it might be a good example for you then. It's the idea is it's an undergraduate education in 1 year. And I'll speak about this too quickly, but you get to learn it very, very fast. You focus only on your job skills, and the reason those are identified is because Mission U partners with some major employers like Uber and Facebook, and at the end you get basically plugged into one of those employers. And the idea is that this is it's aimed at 18-year-olds, but the ones who really, really want to get a job right away, not the ones who want the 4-year residential experience, people who want to just race ahead into the market. Would that be a good example of what might be a better model in your situation?
Yeah, so it sounds a lot better. I'm skeptical that it's actually going to take off. And again, I'm always suspicious that companies that say they're partnering will in fact still strongly prefer people with regular college degrees. So there's the stigma. Like, why are you trying to take the easy way out? If you're good enough to go and get a 4-year degree, why are you trying to do this 1-year degree? Like, don't you understand that in our society, this is expected of you, and this is what people are supposed to do? I think so. Basically, whenever I hear that there's some big company that is totally open-minded about credentials and they're doing all kinds of weird and creative things, normally when I track down someone who actually knows the facts and say, like, really, is this really happening? And I find out it's super disappointing. So again, this is hearsay from some people in Google. It could be wrong, but I've said, I've heard some people can go and get jobs at Google by just winning a contest, even if they don't have credentials. And yeah, of course. Like, well, how many contest winners do you hire versus people who just have degrees from top schools? Like, I don't know. There's like 5 people who won contests and thousands of people who have regular degrees. So it means basically to go in through the unconventional route, you've got to be phenomenal. And it's not a realistic path, even for a normal, hyper-talented person. You've got to be off the charts to do these alternate methods. But again, maybe Mission U is going is the back door to a totally new and better world. But yeah, I am cynical enough to say, I hope so, but it doesn't seem too likely. But it could be a great niche for some people. There's two totally different perspectives on the world. There's one where it's like, well, is this going to go and change the way that everything on Earth is? And then the answer is, well, probably not. And then could improve the lives of a few thousand people. It's like, maybe it could. It's like, well, what have you done to improve the lives of a few thousand people? Not much. No. All right. Well, then why are you criticizing Mission U if they have come up with something that improves the lives of a few thousand people? Again, it's sort of the question of, is it a value product that exists? And it very well may. Versus, is it going to destroy the system, the main system we have? And that's like, I don't think so.
That's a very, very rich answer. This may point to another book, actually, thinking about this. But I have a question in here from someone named C. Hodes, who asks, how do undergrads know what they won't ever use again? I don't think I knew that as an undergrad.
Well, it's a continuum. So if you're studying a dead language, you're probably not going to use it again. If it's history, you're probably not going to use it again. If it is higher mathematics and you're not going to be an engineer or other advanced scientist, then you're probably not going to use it again. If it's art or music, you're probably not going to use it again, regardless of your career aspirations, because becoming a paid artist or musician is super hard. It's ultra competitive. These are all things. When people tell me that they just don't know, it's like, look, you may not know whether one computer language versus another is going to be useful. But someone who says, I don't know whether the market cares more about programming or archaeology, like, really? Well, here's the answer. It cares more about programming, a lot more. Archaeology is not important in the real world. That's the answer. If someone were to say, give me the proof of that. Yeah, if someone's like, what's the proof? I could muster the proof, but do you really need it? Do I have to go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and to show you how many working archaeologists there are in this country versus programmers? And then you can say, look, it's just not in any way credible that you're going to become a working archaeologist.
Statistically unlikely. Yeah.
It's like, come on, what are the odds? People go and delete spam email all the time. Do you really have trouble? How do I know that this isn't a genuine offer that's going to give me $1 million for $1,000? It's like, well, it's just super unlikely, and you should assume not, unless you've got some overwhelming reason to think so. Someone says this archaeology class is your ticket to fame. I just treat that like a telemarketer or like spam email. It's like, anything's possible, but I'm hanging up.
Well, we have a video question coming up. If we can bring them up, and this is Jonathan Parts.
Okay.
Let's see if you can fit. Now, I may be having a problem with my phone and not being able to hear him. So, Professor Parts, I don't think I can hear you, but please ask your question, and I thank you.
Can either Brian hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. So I guess I had sort of one question and then a question about your sort of underlying strategies. My first one, so we're 10 minutes ago or something, there was some discussion about the sort of benefits of education as you were straw manning the sort of general educational benefits of education. And I wonder, it seems to me that there's a fairly, I can't quote studies, but it seems that there's a fairly strong correlation between the amount of education and left-leaning political voting among the population. And so doesn't that, since most of us don't major in government, it would seem like there's something that's happening in education, whether you like the people voting to the left or not, it's having a big impact on people. And certainly their worldview, their view about politics, it has an impact on our society as a whole if different people are voted in because more people are educated. In fact, you could argue that that's one of the reasons that the right wing has been desperately trying to defund education. But anyway, so it seems to me that that's a kind of empirical statement that the add-on benefits or consequences, at least, whether you like them or not, of education are quite enormous. You could just look at the post-Trump education; the correlation was really strong. Yeah, the other question I have is,
great question. And then what's your second question?
So my second question. So you're focusing a lot on kind of routes towards employers, and you're saying the difference between programming and archaeology. I mean, it seems to me that you have a very kind of focused view on what benefits employers. And I've worked in academia and I've worked in industry quite a bit as well. And I have an undergraduate degree from a well-known university in pure mathematics, but what I worked on in industry was programming, and I'm a better programmer because I know pure mathematics. And I think all of the people I worked with were good program. The things they learned. So I've never studied the language that I programmed in, and it seems that a lot of times. So for you to say to someone, study Java because there are more Java jobs. So that's just the same way you were saying a minute ago. It's obvious that that's the right choice because there are more Java job listings. Seems to me that's a little bit naive. Maybe studying other languages are better, or maybe studying archaeology is better if you're going to end up programming to do with certain kinds of user interfaces that, or visual data or something. I don't think you're drawing a direct line. You're saying it's obvious, but I think it's easy to question that. Anyway, I'll just stop there.
All right. So two great questions. So first of all, on the effect of education on politics. So this is a big question. I've got a full section in the book on this. So if you look at data over the last 40 years, the actual correlation between years of education and like how liberal you are is very small. In fact, it's microscopic. This is averaging over 40 years. But it's still interesting that during a period when faculty have been left-leaning throughout, we see very little actual even apparent evidence in effect. So you're right about the last election was special, but this does not seem to be a general built-in feature of education. It seems like it's primarily something that's happened very recently, and again may just go away once Trump goes away. In terms of what's going on, like one possibility you could say is, faculty are just not trying that hard to indoctrinate their students. They're really very fair-minded, and they're just trying to expose students to both sides of the issue. And despite their own views, this is what's going on. That doesn't seem very plausible to me based on my experience. Another story, which I think is better, is just the faculty are not very persuasive. They're boring. Students have low attendance anyway. They're paying attention to their phones. So you could be listening to a guy trying to teach you all about the wonders of Howard Zinn, but if you don't show up to half the classes and you're on your phone most of the rest of the time, and you're just not that politically aware anyway, you might not even realize what he's trying to do or what he's trying to communicate. Now, when you go and look at specific issue views, then you do see much bigger effects of education, right? And again, there's the raw correlation, but of course, there's people also try to do a higher quality job where you're trying to make at least adjust for other factors. But here, the striking thing is that the measured effect of education on issue views is something different from what almost everyone expects. And namely, what we really see is that people with more education seems to make people more socially liberal, but also more economically conservative, right? So something that their professors are not trying to do, something that almost no one is trying to do, and yet this seems to be what's occurring. So I say probably the real story going on is that there's peer effects. It's not that your professors are changing your mind, it's that your minds are being changed around by other students. But again, if this is the story, then it's much less clear that there's any net social effect, because essentially the way the peer effects work is you segregate people into two groups. And if you are in one group, then you tend to pick up the views of that group. But if you're in another group, you tend to pick up the views of that group. So if you go and move the socially liberal, economically conservative people into colleges, you're automatically going and making the people that are not going to college more socially conservative and more economically liberal. And I'd say this is actually a pretty good story for what happened in the last election, is that Trump is really tapping into this large group of people who are intellectually isolated from the political outlook of well-educated people. And so when you siphon those people who are socially liberal but economically conservative off into universities, then of course it's not just a matter of physical segregation, it's also social segregation that continues after graduation. Then we wind up getting these effects, but in the net effect. So again, like just by analogy, suppose that colleges generally are people there are generally less religious. So if you randomly pluck a religious kid and send him to college, he's probably going to become less religious. But going and sending kids to college is not a good way to reduce the religiosity of society, because when you move people over there, you also means that the people who don't go to college now have a more religious peer group. This is a really complicated issue. And again, it's one where I'm saying something that almost nobody likes to hear because, as you mentioned, Conservatives and libertarians love the story of colleges are doing this massive left-wing brainwashing or indoctrination. And I have to be there saying, well, I don't like that either, but I don't see that much evidence that it actually works. Now, on the question of if I have a too narrow of a view of what benefits employers, this is a case where you need to be moderately open-minded. All right, so it's one, so if I were to say, like, there's absolutely nothing useful that you could ever learn in history class, that'd be too strong. It's like, well, some history classes are very writing intensive, and when you go and learn that writing, that could possibly be a useful skill. And I'm going to say, all right, fine. There could be that part in those classes like that where you're actually getting a lot of feedback from the professor on your writing that are really writing intensive. But still, to say that it is plausible that archaeology would be useful for a programmer, that just seems crazy to me. Like you can sit around racking your brain and saying, I can imagine a scenario where it's useful. Maybe you're going to be working on Tomb Raider as a video game programmer, and so the archaeology is going to wind up appearing there. But still, like if you had to actually put a dollar value on that training that you're getting, the case of pure mathematics is interesting because one of the most common routes for financially successful mathematicians is just go straight to Wall Street, where they then go and do statistics. Something that pure mathematicians don't spend much time on. They're going and proving theorems to each other. Again, you can say, well, proving theorems, like you're getting some use there. There's such a gap between, like pure mathematical theorems and applied statistics. Again, if you could just imagine having redirected the time that you're proving theorems into actually playing with data, the odds that it's more fruitful to go and prove a bunch of theorems than hope it comes in useful later on. Again, that could be, but just seems very remote to me. Right. Again, there is this effort to, sort of like reverse sour grapes, where given that I've done it, it must have been a good reason for it. In the book, I tell a story of a guy who said, hey, like I studied French in high school and it was really useful. I'm like, really? How? He says, well, once I was at the Paris airport and there was an announcement in French that my plane was my gate was being changed. I would have missed the flight if I didn't know French. It's like, so you spent 3 or 4 years studying French in order to save a few hours in an airport one day, and that seems like a good argument to you? It doesn't seem like a good argument to me.
It seems to me that the kind of reductive view of education should focus on what's going to be useful to employers. When I was in industry, when we were hiring people, if I had someone who had, a Microsoft certification, programmer certification, this and that, and I had 10 courses in different languages and things, and someone who could prove to me, which is fairly easy, I can ask them a question and ask them, and they can prove their technical chops pretty quickly, and had a degree in art history or archaeology or something different, I would hire the second one. All other things being equal, I would absolutely hire the person who had the more general education than because I think perhaps this is a failure of current education. Maybe your point is not about the sad reality of current education. The sad reality of current education is that targeted education to what we think employers want often makes very narrow-minded people who can we're teaching to the test, where the test is what we imagine employers want. That's not exactly what employers want, and
right.
A lot of employers.
Or again, how about my story? How about just my story that the person with the art history degree signaled a bunch of things that the person with the CS certifications only didn't. So again, it's one thing to say that you think the person with the art history degree will be better. It's another thing to say that the art history degree caused them to be better. Could just be that you say, hey, we want a person that isn't trying to just take the easy way out, that has some other that has these other capabilities. It doesn't mean that they're causing the capabilities. So again, a big part of my book is saying that for most people it isn't very effective to go and try to skip college and just get some certifications, because employers are like, well, why didn't you just do the normal thing that is approved of in our society? Why couldn't you do that? But thanks for your questions. Well, those are both very good questions, and I try to not say things that are straw men. Although again, I could see how it could come off that way. So thanks.
Well, Jonathan, thank you very much for the question. About 60 seconds ago, I was able to start hearing it. So I'm looking forward to hearing it on the recording. And I really appreciate the perspective from what I was able to glean. We have a whole stack of text questions, which we can bring up. If we could, I think we have here one from Shell Sachs. Let me see if this is right. Do you think that the current turmoil in campus, in particular the social justice disruption in many elite liberal arts colleges, is a threat to the value of the credential?
Not much. I mean, I don't see any sign that employers are getting less interested in hiring students from top schools. And maybe if it's a school that people know nothing else about other than that kids protest there a lot, then they might be wondering. But again, I think that employers are numerate enough to realize that it's just a few troublemakers that are protesters. Like the protesters may claim to speak for the whole student body. They don't. They speak for themselves, a few other people. And so if you as an employer were to go and say, well, there's like 10 kids who are really angry about people using the word he on a campus, so I don't want to hire any of the thousands of people from that school, that would be a gross overreaction. One of the main things that people do in business is distinguish between actually quantitatively important things and mere symbols, and try to plan their business around that. So, like if you go and say, well, I see these protesters, apparently there's going to be a big market in protest shirts. I better print up 500 million protest shirts. It's like, wow, I only sold 500 of them. Apparently those kids are not really indicative of a broad trend. Like the way you got on TV is by being, by standing out and being different from other people. Like, the whole idea, like I'm the voice of my generation. It's like, no, you're not. You speak for yourself or a few other people. Most people, like really the people who speak for their generation, the people who just go with the flow and that are never going to be on TV. They speak for their generation more than the people that get on do.
So, Shel, that was a good question. And Brian, that's a surprising answer, but I think a very persuasive one. I don't see Yale dropping in its value right now, for example. I'm conscious of time. We have about 9 minutes, or 7 minutes, and we have more questions. Tara, what's the next text question that we can bring up, please? This is from Taylor. I'd be interested to hear Brian's reaction to the hypocrisy that must come from teaching within the system he dismisses. And that actually shows up in the book, I think, from the first chapter and on. You say that you think you have an unusually delightful and privileged position, and yet you're frustrated at certain parts of it. Yeah.
So, like, how do I deal with hypocrisy? I guess the truth is that, I am a super positive person. I'm not sure whether it comes off from the book, but I'm someone who's always trying to figure out how can I make this a good day. And how can I find value in things? How can I find people that are good? And if someone says, well, most people don't care, I'm like, well, I know that, but that's not helpful to me. How can I find people that are interesting? How can I find students that care? So, personally, for me, so when I teach a class, honestly, I teach the top of the class, people that are really curious, and I basically teach the same class that I would teach if everyone were enthusiastic. Right. And therefore I enjoy it. And there's a few people that get a lot of value out of it. And again, the rest of the students, they don't seem very happy. I don't think there's anything that would make them happy other than just saying you get an A for doing no work. I think that's the sort of the one thing that would satisfy most students. Graduate students are different, of course, because they're more motivated and have some more curiosity. Even there, they can be kind of disappointing sometimes. In terms of how do I deal with other people's hypocrisy? Honestly, it barely even impinges on me. I don't have to listen to it. Most of the time, I'm just working in my office doing my thing, and I think about it, what's going on this campus? Yeah, there's a bunch of people going and spewing some ridiculous propaganda about the incredible value of what they're doing while the students are sleeping at their desks. But what else is new? I've known this for my whole life. I guess I'll say that when I was young, the hypocrisy bothered me a lot. So, I can remember just being in junior high and it's like, this is terrible. And this, all this has to be stopped and crushed. And I can't believe this is going on. How all these pompous teachers and these ridiculous lies. And the principal comes on over the intercom and makes an announcement about how we all love it here when it's plainly not true. And, when I was young, this really bothered me a lot. But so I'll just say that as you get older and if you plan things out and if you game the system, then you're likely to be able to get the kind of life that you want. And then you just don't feel so bad about the system. Doesn't mean that the system isn't still bad. And a lot of what Ryan wrote the book is just to go and pull the curtain aside and say, everybody, in case you hadn't heard, this is how things are going. But in terms of how I deal with it, I'll say most days I don't even think about it. I just live a good day and take pride in my work and have rich and satisfying relationships with friends and students while realizing that that's not the main story of what's going on here.
I really want to make a reference to Coas's nature of the firm here, but I'm conscious of time and there's other questions that have come up. Tara, what's the next text question that we've got? This is from the awesome Roxanne Riskin. He says, I wonder something personal. If your children attend school, and why?
Yeah, so the answer is that my two older sons I homeschool. I was super nervous about doing this precisely because of the book, because I'm worried about ruining their futures and them not getting the proper stamps and seals of approval. And so before I even considered doing this, I looked very closely into it and again tried to find neutral researchers with no dog in the fight and asked them, like, how bad is the discrimination of colleges against homeschoolers? And again, the basic answer is back in the 80s when few people were doing it, maybe it was pretty bad, but now there's so many that, again, as long as you have a bunch of other signals, such as AP tests, which we do a lot of, then it seems like, especially for us, that that homeschooling is a good option, right? And in fact, I think it's a better way for us to excel because there's a lot of things that we can do as homeschoolers that so we did 4 AP tests in middle school as homeschoolers. Well, so
did you say AP or AB?
Yeah, AP. Yeah, thanks, so we did 4 advanced placement tests in middle school, and got 5s on all of those. So we've already got a lot more college credit than most people have when they start college. So done a bunch of things like that. So now part of it is just that we can get that we can do a better job. But I wouldn't be doing this unless my kids wanted to. So I don't have conscripts. I don't cajole kids. I don't pressure them. They were desperate to do it. Just, they love learning, and therefore they were miserable in regular school. Now I've got two younger kids. My 2 younger kids still go to regular public school, and I'll say I'm not that impressed with what they're learning, but they're happy, and they're too young for them to actually do what I tell them. So my older kids, I give them a schedule and they do the work. My younger kids, they wouldn't let me do my job if they were here. So there's that, but but also they're happy in school. So I think as they get older, they're probably going to become less and less happy. That's at least what happened with my older sons. And then I'll say, look, I want to give you the same option that your brothers had. But homeschooling is something that works for some people, doesn't work for others. It depends upon what kind of a job you have, what kind of a kid you've got. It's not the kind of thing that I would try to push on people. But if you've got, I'm always happy to answer questions about it because. I know my older kids, literally every day when they come to the office with me every day, and literally every day they're saying, thank God we're here. God, I hated it back there so much. So much better. Wow. So that makes me happy that I can do that for them and just give them a better life than I have. Yeah.
I bet it does. And I know that describes some proportion of homeschool teachers, parents who do that. On a related note, not a question, we had a note from Taylor Kendall, who said that the education system seems to be moving towards finding a balance between these different forms. He said we need to find the space on the spectrum between the Minerva or Mission U model, the small focused one, and the industrial model. I think we had one more video question or one more text question, Tara. Can you pop up whichever one is good? This comes from Kelly Walsh. Kelly, by the way, is a great person, great guru about the flipped classrooms. Solutions? I would love to see a continued push for employers to recognize smaller, more focused credentials. Now, if only DOE Title IV funding, be more flexible about supporting those. Sorry, it's not a question as much as a comment.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense to me too. Again, the main thing is just that if my book is right, there's a reason why the employers are not paying attention to those credentials, which is that on average, the people who do them are not as good as people that are getting college degrees. So again, that could be wrong, but again, to me, it's always kind of presumptuous as a professor to tell someone with practical business experience you're going and making bad hiring decisions. Instead, I'm more inclined to say I'm a little puzzled by why this is good, but could you let me know about it? Again, normally employers will just give you a very pragmatic. Well, we find that when we hire people without college degrees, we're just a lot more likely to be disappointed. Which again, I say just makes perfect sense in a society where there's so much pressure on people to do it. The kind of people that don't do it generally have some kind of an issue with authority, or they're just not finishers, or they just don't understand what's expected, what other people want from them. So yeah, I'd love to see the system go and at least be chipped away at. Again, I think a lot of the best prospects for that are to build it into the K-12 system so that it's not just one weird person doing something different, but rather, again, you can get a whole district or whole generation of kids that are getting more vocational education, in which case, again, like it's not that they personally chose it, it's that they revised the curriculum. And again, I mean, I know a lot of people just get very uncomfortable when you talk about it, but look, every school district has a curriculum. If taxpayers are paying for it, there's going to be some standards of what's worthwhile and what's not. So I think it's very, very well worth saying, well, why don't we think about more vocational stuff and putting that into the curriculum? It certainly is an option. Well, if there's going to be any requirements, why not require people to get some job experience?
I hate to do this, but we are out of time. We have had an hour just race by at top speed. And I want to pick out one thing you said just as a pointer for everybody else. When you mentioned persistence in school, in the book, I don't know if you had chance to mention it today, but that you find that certification, the Sheepskin Effect, is among other things a sign of persistence, that someone was able to spend for 8 years through a program.
Right, and conformity. Just so, like, if our society says it's 4 years, you do 4 years. If society said 3, you do 3. Whatever we say, you do.
Right.
Yes, sir.
You've gone through the hoops. Brian, you've gone through our hoops splendidly. Thank you so much for answering all of our questions from a wide range of people. Your book is, like I said, very provocative, really accessible. I think at least one order has just come through in the chat box. So I'm glad we could help. I would love to follow up with you on your next project, and next time awesome. I'm in town, I would love to buy you coffee and converse more about this.
Absolutely, Brian. That'll be fantastic. And by the way, so if there's any questions I didn't get to, if you tweet them to me, I'm pretty likely to respond. So it's just at Brian_Caplan. Oh,
good. And I've been using your handle on with the hashtag FTTE, so everybody else can find it pretty easily. Once again, thank you for being here, and thank you for being a fantastic guest. I really appreciate it.
That's my pleasure. Thanks a lot, everybody. You guys are great.
Great. And now let me tell everybody about the next couple of weeks before we have to disappear completely. And let me thank everybody, by the way, for your excellent questions. I really appreciate this. This is a really challenging and provocative book, and I think I really admire the variety and thought that you put into your questions. Thank you. Next week, speaking of variety and thought, we have a different topic. This is Professor Nathan Grau, who is an economist at Carleton College, who just published a wonderful book about demographics in education. I think it's probably the most important book on higher education, published in 2018. He has a very, very powerful, incredibly backed up argument about what's going to happen to the population of college-going students. I strongly recommend the book. I'm really looking forward to this, so please join us next week to talk about demographics. And then also coming up, let's see, what's on our next slide? Our book club, as just mentioned, just finished soonish. So if you haven't a chance to finish your copy, the blog posts are there, and the book is just a real treat. I really recommend it. So please dig into that. And then meanwhile, what else do we have? We also have the bookstore. So if you want to get Bryan Caplan's book, just go to brianalexander.org/bookstore and pick it up. We've got a whole bunch of other titles there. It is the only future of education bookstore on earth. I'm really, really excited for it. So please dive in and grab some Kindle books or hardcover paperbacks for what you need. And I think that's about it. If you'd like to learn more about the Ftd Report, go to ftt.us. You can find shindig.com for more information about this technology. If you want to keep talking about this stuff, here are a bunch of Twitter handles for me, for Shindig. If you want to bug Shindig on Facebook or LinkedIn, there's that. And if you want to follow my work on a blog, go to brianalexander.org. In the meantime, thank you all so much. I have to now run and catch a plane. But thank you so much. I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.